It's time to check your money with America's Money Maven, Vicki Brackens. Vicki Brackens is the president of Brackens Financial Solutions Network, LLC, and a registered representative of LPL Financial, member SIPC. Vicki, we've got a special guest in the building.
Yes, we do. We have a very special guest in the building. I thought it was probably time for us to spend some time digging very deeply into many of the issues that have taken place concerning Micron and economic development in our local area. And what better way to do so than have the president of the Center State CEO, Central New York's premier business leadership and economic development organization that's committed to creating a region where businesses thrive and all people prosper on our show today to give us insight on not only what has happened in the past, but what's happening in the future. So Rob Simpson, welcome to our segment of America's Money Maven today.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you, George. Great to be here.
And Vicki, so this is a quiz for you, Vicki. Do you know what CEO stands for?
Yeah, Central North.
What does it stand for, Vicki?
Oh my gosh. Okay.
This is on my executive committee, so.
Oh, don't do this.
Oh, I didn't. Okay? Oh, I didn't know that. Oh.
Okay. The Corporation for Economic Opportunity.
Corporation for Economic Opportunities. And you're right. I was supposed to give that disclaimer starting out that I am on the executive committee for Center State CEO and have served there on the investment committee as the investment committee chair for, I think this is now my third term or third year.
Third year.
So, George, I know that you have heard all types of things concerning what's happening with Micron, but I know also from all the years of working with Rob that this has not been an instantaneous journey. And I wanted to dovetail back into a couple of areas to make sure we put some context around what has happened. Now, Rob, if I remember correctly, you're a graduate of Colgate?
That's correct.
Maxwell School?
Yes, ma'am.
Left here and went to work down in Washington, D.C.
I sure did.
Okay, tell me a little bit about what happened there.
So I went right after college. You know, like so many kids who grew up in upstate New York, I think as I was getting ready to graduate high school, the predominant message that found its way to my ears was that in order to make something of yourself, you needed to leave Central New York, and that there weren't jobs here, there wasn't a future here, and you know, as a young person, that's you try to take advice and listen to people who are around you, but it's certainly disappointing. Going down to DC, I had a chance to work on Capitol Hill. I served as a speechwriter and the assistant legislative director for Senator Jay Rockefeller, who was a senator from the state of West Virginia. Really phenomenal individual who I enjoyed working with, learned a ton from. Worked there for about 3.5, 4 years, and then came up here to get my MPA. Went back to DC for a couple more and did some lobbying work for an environmental organization, and then found my way back to home, Central New York, in August of 2003. So just over 20 years now since I moved back.
I wanted you to put that timestamp on there of being 2003 because it's been 2000, like you said, about 20 years since that took place. And I think you and I met probably September or so of that same.
Right around that time.
Okay. Yeah.
And did you go right to work for the MDA at the time, the Metropolitan
I
Development Association?
I did. When I moved back, I was, I think my title was Economic Development Coordinator for the Metropolitan Development Association, which was one of the predecessor companies to Center State CEO, organization that had been around for about 50 years, represented most of the large companies in town, and had an economic and a civic mission. It was in that capacity that I really was put to task researching and learning about the Central New York economy, the history, the present day, the data, and that experience really provided the foundation, I think, at least for me, for so much of the work that I continue to do, and you know, frankly, was the reason why I was able to get back home to upstate New York.
So, looking at that all as far as the history, the data, all the research that you did that help you make a decision concerning? This is the place for me to come back to raise my family and dig in to make changes here?
I mean, the truth is, both my wife and I are from upstate New York. By the time I came around, my family grew up in Syracuse. My dad grew up here. My grandfather used to work at GE when there was 22,000 people out at the plant
Hmm.
electronics park. By the time I came around, we lived in Utica, and I ended up at Colgate. My wife grew up in the Finger Lakes and ended up at Colgate, and that's where we met. And I think after being in Washington for 4 or 5 years, we both decided we missed home. We wanted to be closer to the Adirondacks, and upstate New York was a place that was very fond to us, and that we were excited to move back to. I think for me, professionally, listen, I worked on Capitol Hill. It sounds like a glamorous job, and in some respects, it was fascinating. It was fun. It was probably even cool. But no speech I ever wrote changed anyone's mind. No bill I ever drafted got signed into law. And as someone who is very motivated by the impact that I'm able to have, uh, there was something dramatically missing. And the opportunity to have an impact on the place that I called home, when that opportunity presented itself, it was an easy decision.
Okay, so that really dovetails easily into my next question, which is, do you have a mission, or were you given a mission that you decided to execute?
Well, the mission, the task really that I was given when I first came back in 2003 was to literally find as much data as I could, historical and present day, about what was happening with the Central New York economy, with the goal of beginning to plot a path out of what I call the economic malaise that this community was in for 40, 50, 60 years. I've always been a very data-driven individual. I think data is central to having a credible strategy. It's important to be authentic and to not present yourself as a community as something that you aren't, never were, or never have any potential to be. And so data was really the foundational element. I think in the 20 years that I've been back, though, um, I've gotten, through my experiences and connections with all of you, I've gotten a much deeper sense of what is important to this community and what holds this community back. And it was when we formed Center State's CEO back in 2010. We brought the Syracuse Chamber and the MDA and a whole bunch of other organizations together so that we could stop competing against each other locally and start competing against the rest of the world. And it was at that point that we decided that we were going to plant our flag to create a region where businesses thrive and all people prosper. And I emphasize the word all because I think that's just so important to me as a person. I know it is to both of you. We have a community that hasn't always had broadly shared economic benefits, and we have deep disparities, racial, socioeconomic, that need to be addressed. And putting that front and center in our organization's mission has been both critically important and also, I think, a key to our success.
So putting that, and I can remember many a times when we had the Economic Champions event, which is coming up very shortly. And the last thing that you would say, as far as when you got up to address the audience, was a call to action around making sure that all people prosper. But the needle didn't move a lot early.
No, it's
At what
it's
point? Okay, I'm going to be real kind. It didn't move a lot early.
No,
Okay.
you're right.
Okay. What started the needle moving?
Well, let's see. I think there's a couple of things. One, which is we've now had a couple of decades of sustained strategic effort that is data driven, that is focused on understanding where we're competitive and how our competitive strengths, whether they're our industry sectors or the talents of our people, how those things line up against global markets, right? People and companies who are buying products and buying services, and where we fit into that equation. And so we've gotten better and better over the years at understanding that, at developing initiatives designed to help build those parts of our economy. And we've also gotten better at resourcing them, meaning we can do more and at a greater scale. I think the the really critical component from my perspective to the relative economic turnaround that we're seeing here in Central New York, I'd point to a couple of things. One, which is we have a growing tech economy again, which is an entrepreneurial ecosystem that had been left for dead. When I moved back in 2003, Central New York ranked 134th out of 150 metros in its ratio of business births to deaths, right? How many companies do you start? How many companies fail? Really simple but elegant metric for whether or not your community is thriving or not. We were at the bottom of our peer group, and you just can't build a successful economy when you lose more companies than you start. So rebuilding that innovation ecosystem through the Tech Garden and other partners, SSIC on the South Side, some of the work that happens at Whitman, the programs at Lemoyne, has been fundamental, and we're seeing success, real success, that's emerging from that ecosystem. The second thing, and I would say this is even more important, is that we have rediscovered as a community how to work together. And Vicki and George, you both know, because we've been doing this together a long time, we have seen periods in our recent history, relatively recent history, where elected officials, business leaders, civic leaders have traded insults on the front page of the newspaper and have refused to engage and collaborate, and where we've actively alienated stakeholders like our state government or our federal government. To what end and for what purpose? Today, I'm incredibly proud of the fact that we have a community of partners across almost every sector, but starting with our elected leadership, our county executive who was just reelected this week again for a second term, our mayor who's in his second term, and so many others who talk to each other, and we share ideas, and we brainstorm together, and we work together. And I think for the most part, we actually support each other. And that makes a tremendous difference. When we are trying to compete against the rest of the world, we cannot be competing against ourselves. And when we work together, we win. It's pretty simple. But that has not always been the case for us. It is today. And I think it's one of the reasons why the needle's moving.
And I agree 100% because we've all witnessed it. We've seen that the collaboration around many of our partners here have made a difference. But the other part of the needle that I was asking you about is the portion of the needle on the conversation or the mission of making sure that all prosper. How are we doing on moving that needle?
Listen, we have some empirical evidence, some data that shows that the needle is moving in some positive directions. We've begun to close slowly and incrementally. I want to be clear. We've begun to close some of the income gap between Black and white, Latino and white. Those are important metrics. We still have 50% of the children in the city of Syracuse who live in poverty. So, there is a lot of great work that has happened over the course of the last decade. There's a lot more intentionality and a lot more focus. And I think the importance of bringing our entire community along, I think, is now understood and a shared value amongst almost all of our community leadership. I mean, if you listen to the county executive, he talks about three things. He talks about poverty and infrastructure and economic development. You look at the mayor, and he talks about his vision for Syracuse and how diversity is central to the success of the city that he and his administration are trying to build. That shared intentionality has been, I think, really, really important. But it's also critical to acknowledge that we still have vast inequalities that exist in our community, as they exist across our country and, frankly, around the world. These are deep and long-standing and pernicious challenges, and we are going to have to work not just for 20 years. We're going to have to work for the next 50 years, consistently, intentionally, if we're going to close all those gaps at the way in which I think we aspire to.
So, Rob, let me follow up on Vicki's question about opportunities for all. So, a lot of people some people were upset about the idea of an aquarium, and they said that money could have been better used to fight some of the very things that you just spoke of. How did you feel about that?
I understand why people might not, at the point at which the aquarium was talked about, people might not have fully understood the strategic component of it. But I'll admit, I support the aquarium. I believe it's an important project. I believe that growing communities, which we are now, need more cultural amenities, recreational amenities, educational amenities, and we need more amenities for people with families. I've got an 11-year-old, and you know what? At the end of the day, Syracuse doesn't offer everything that I would like this community to offer. for people with young families. So I understand the argument that perhaps people feel like that $85 million could have been spent in some other place. But the reality is we can spend in other places too. We don't always have to accept the binary choices that so many people and frankly so many leaders try to put in front of us. Right. At the end of the day, I think what is so remarkable about this moment that we have here in Central New York is that we are really trying, and I think on some level succeeding in doing, in doing both of these things. For the beginning of my career, one of the things that I found frustrating was the idea that that somehow economic growth and community development, right, the things that actually impact people in their day-to-day lives, were somehow separate and distinct disciplines, and maybe more importantly, that those two things had to be fundamentally at odds. Right? If a company was growing, that was somehow bad for the people who live here, or vice versa. Right? I reject that kind of principle, and frankly, one of the things I've loved to do, that I still love to do, I take every opportunity to do, is to try to translate between stakeholders who have this deeply entrenched perspective of what somebody else thinks or does. Companies growing is fundamental to human prosperity. They create employment opportunities. Those jobs create wealth for people and for their families. Where the breakdowns have occurred is that those opportunities haven't always been available to everyone in our community, whether it's for artificial barriers that have been put in place over the years, or whether it's for lack of transportation or other supports. There are so many different ways that we can create economic growth and human prosperity, shared human prosperity for all simultaneously. That when I hear that argument, hey, we should have taken that aquarium money, we should have done something else with it, I just don't buy it. I totally believe we should do, we can do both. We need to do both. We must do both.
And by the way, I was also in the minority in many sectors of community that I'm in, but I supported it too.
I supported the aquarium too.
For the record, but Rob, so I was in the minority, but
I understand. I understand.
Okay. So, one of the things, and I know that this conversation, I can feel it already. This conversation needs to go on for a longer period of time than we probably had initially scheduled. And so I'm glad that you gave me the go ahead that we can continue this probably next week. But what I want to say is this, before we segue into our close, I think it's really important that we go back, Rob, and sort of put in place all of the things, the many things that happened over the last 20 years before we got to Micron that were actually building blocks to get us there. Because it has been a 20-year journey. I'm thinking about things like New Air and Genius New York and the Grants for Growth programs and all of those types of things. Can you build that timeline out for us just a little bit? As deeply as you can, as fast as you can. Yes.
Briefly.
Yeah, it's like a trip down memory lane, right?
Right.
Yes, I think, listen, at the end of the day, we, at the time, 20 years ago, we had a downtown that was oftentimes viewed as vacant, abandoned, and boarded up. It was a little bit of a laughing element on the front page of the newspaper. We had to turn the very image of our city around, the image that we project to the rest of the world. All of the work that's gone into remaking downtown Syracuse, reinvesting in all those properties, bringing them back to life, creating places for people to live and to eat and to work, has been foundational. Because I can tell you this, when Micron came to town and we had 36 hours with them, you know where we spent most of our time? In downtown Syracuse, showing them what we did. We had to rebuild the innovation economy, right? That didn't exist, and we had to put those building blocks in place. We didn't have the collaboration muscle, right? We had to build that together to create a willingness for people to take risks and to sometimes disagree, but to do it in ways that aren't necessarily disagreeable. So we had to rebuild some of our workforce development system and help do a better job of connecting people to opportunities so that when jobs are created, people in every neighborhood and every part of Central New York region have opportunities to access that. So yes, each one of those was a building block that I think has positioned us for the moment we're in, positioned us to help land Micron. I mean, I'll say Micron was the most collaborative thing that I've ever worked on in my entire career. The partnerships between the county and the Senate, Senate Majority Leader and the governor, and all of our other academic partners was remarkable. But you have to understand, if we hadn't have been investing in ourselves for the previous decade, Micron's not coming to Central New York. They understood what we're trying to do, and they understood what we're trying to accomplish. They believed in the narrative that we were building and the future that we were building for ourselves. And we happened to find a partner that was a perfect fit.
Well, Rob, I'm going to stop here because ending on a perfect fit is a perfect time to stop. But I want to thank you for taking the time. And we're going to pick this up again next week. So I'm encouraging everyone to tune in again next week so we can talk about the second half, which is really about the team and what it took for the team to get us into the position as far as landing Micron and what we have to do going into the future. If you have any questions, feel free to give me a call at area code 315-930-4499. That's 930-4499, or reach out at info@brackensfsn.com, info@brackensfsn.com. And at this point in time, George, I will say our plate is full.
And make sure you share and subscribe to this video. All right, here we go. Vicki Brackens is the president of Brackens Financial Solutions Network, LLC, and a registered representative of LPL Financial, member SIPC. She is America's money maven. We want to also thank Rob Simpson.